Welcome to the circle that holds the diversity of our experiences, of our cultures, our languages, our ways of making meaning and understanding our lives in the world, our ethnicities, our sexual orientation and gender identities, our ages and stages in life. And it matters that you've chosen to take your place in the circle today. We need the gift of your presence, who you are and what you bring. Whatever your week has been, wherever it is you come from, you have a place here, a unique place, a place that's missing without you. And you're welcome in this circle, whether you've never been here before or you haven't been here in a long time, or you're usually here when this circle takes its shape. And we gather in this ancient configuration, a formation for storytelling, for conversation, for learning, for listening, a formation that signifies equality, that's without a hierarchy, a circle that's never closed, that's always expanding. And we sing ourselves into this circle as we greet this day with gratitude.
As we gather in this building that we know as Southminster Steinhauer United Church, we recognize that it has not always been here. It has not always been called this. And this land has been here long before any of us. And so we acknowledge, as we do each time we gather, that we're located here on this precious, precious land. This land that we honor as Treaty 6 territory. A traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, the Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Deneta, Inuit, and many others, whose histories and languages and cultures continue to influence our vibrant communities.
Again, into this space, we circle this table, and someone lights this candle. We gather today as we have gathered before, and we will gather again and again. With our own reasons and from our own lives, each of us chose today to gather in this ritual of gathering and of being together. We are meaning-making creatures. Rituals create meaning. Rituals enact meaning. They encourage us to pause in the ordinary and honor a moment with a symbolic act. And always we find meaning. Here we seek to make meaning of the experiences of our lives, and we do that through ritual. Rituals of singing, of storytelling, rituals honored from times past, and those symbolic acts that have been created by this community to make meaning together. So, we light this candle as our opening ritual, and to remind us of the beauty and importance of ritual.
Our time for all ages. You got it right. Anyone who wants to join us on the carpet is welcome to come. All right. Hi, everyone. Nice of you to come and sit down on the carpet. When Allison lit the candle this morning, she talked a little bit about rituals, and that's a big fancy word. I want to talk to you about something that's kind of like that. Does anybody have to set the table at their house? Yes? Yes? Do you do it every day or just sometimes, or do you take turns? You have to always do it? Okay. So, many people would call that a chore. Something you've got to do because probably someone in your house asks you or tells you to do it, right? Well, it might be called a chore, but I want us to think about it in a different way. So, I've got a few things for us here, and we're going to set the table. Hello? Okay. I only brought 2 place settings because there's already stuff on our table. At my house, we'd get in trouble because we have to clear off the table first and then set the table. But we're not going to do that. So I need lots of volunteers. Maybe all of us can participate in some way. So the first thing we need to do is kind of make room, make the place. And lots of families and houses do this different, but in our house we do it with placemats. So this kind of marks the territory of where other things are going to go, so that it's not just scattered everywhere. I don't know if you do that, but could I have 2 people that could volunteer to just find a place on the table that could put the placemats? Thank you very much. That makes total sense to me. Okay, great. These are just the first ones I grabbed in the kitchen this morning. I guess our meal isn't going to be very big. It's going to be small, but could someone put the plates out? 2 other people put the plates out? Anyone else put a plate out? Asher, do you want to put the plate? No? Okay, here we go. And we've got knives. Anyone? Thank you. Forks. Could someone do forks? Forks, there we go. Napkins. Could someone do the napkins? Thank you very much. I've got some glasses. Could you do the glasses, please? Sure, that'll help. Great, okay. Thank you. So, that was pretty easy. When we do something like that, even if we do it every day, we think, oh, not again. But you know what? When we're part of a group or a family, we're all part of some kind of family at home, right? We're all part of a group of friends. We're all part of a community maybe like this one with a lot of people that come together. And we can all participate in our own way in something we do again and again. Now, maybe it's setting the table, but maybe it's other things that we do again and again. So setting the table is one. I don't know, do any of you in your house have something that you do again and again? And it can be a chore, it can be something else, it can be something fun, it can be something... What did you want to say, Callum? Unload the dishwasher. Yes. That has to happen almost as often as setting the table, doesn't it? Yeah. Anything else anyone does that they do over and over again? Yeah, Kara? Put your laundry away, also a good one. We did something this morning. In fact, Allison did it for us this morning. We lit that candle on the table. We do that every week. We light the candle. And sometimes maybe we do it so often you don't even notice anymore. It's like, oh yeah, the candle's coming next. Right, we have to light the candle. But you know what? These things that we do over and over again, they're very important. You know, it might be like when we go to Kid Spirit, and if you've been to Kid Spirit, then you know this. If you've never been to Kid Spirit, then you don't know that one of the first things they do, what you do in that room is there's a little board with like empty spaces, candle kind of spaces, and each of you get a chance to put a candle flame on the board when you say your name and when you meet each other every week. So that's something that you do every time Kid Spirit happens. And maybe it's just a fun way to say your name, or maybe it's kind of boring and you have to wait for everyone to do it. But these things are very important, and I'll tell you why. Because whenever we do them, we can feel really good about each other, and it makes us feel like we're a part of a group together and that we belong. These things are important for that reason, that we know who we are because of all these things we do. We know that we're part of a family or a part of a group or part of Kid Spirit or part of a class at school. We know we belong there because of these things that we do that make us us. And the other reason that it's important is that they help us feel like when lots of things change, Some of you might be in new grades at school, new classes. Some of you might be doing some new activities this September that you've never done before, like dance or music class or sports or who knows what. You're doing new things. And sometimes these things that we do over and over again, they help us feel, something I know, something familiar, something I recognize, something that makes me strong, and know that that it can give me strength. Even when everything else is changing and everything else is new, this is one thing I know. That's why these things we do again and again are so important. So as we share gratitude with each other, as we put a candle on the board in Kids Spirit, as you empty the dishwasher or set the table today, remember all the wonderful things about doing things again and again for your family or your community. They really help us, and they help us know who we are and feel stronger and better about that. So thank you for helping set this table. We're going to really be glad for that a little bit later, when we can all come back and share in bread and juice together, if that's part of what because that's one of the other things that we do that help us when we gather. So it's time for Kids Spirit, and
About 40 years after the death of Jesus, some stories and some sayings attributed to him were written down that we have in our collection of writings from the first century. This story comes from a collection of stories found in Mark's Gospel, what is thought to have been the first and earliest of those Gospels that were written. And this story comes in a midway point, kind of as things are beginning to change from the experience of moving around the Galilee and teaching with his friends to moving towards the events that happened to end his life in Jerusalem. This is a retelling of a story from Mark chapter 9. Away from the pressures and expectations of the crowd, Jesus took Peter and James and John, and he climbed with them to a place of quiet, a place where nothing was required of them. In the solitude of that mountain experience, they perceived a change in their teacher and their friend. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. And there was a striking radiance that emanated from him. It was a shining moment not only for Jesus, but for each of them. Soon there were other voices they were hearing. The voice of Moses and Elijah as representatives of their tradition of the law and the prophets. And Peter wanted to preserve this moment somehow, to build a monument, pitch a tent, make a booth, do something to memorialize the moment, to acknowledge the sacredness of the experience, to honor its extraordinariness. And the disciples were afraid. But then a cloud embraced them, and they heard a word of affirmation, a confirmation of the belovedness of their companion. And when they looked around, they were alone with their teacher again. This is a paraphrase of a story from the Jesus tradition passed down to us in writings from the first century.
That you die, what you have is moments. Hopefully many of them, but nonetheless, that's all you've got. So then the question is how to really appreciate them and how to celebrate them. So I am a celebrant. Most people, when I say that, just go, why has she just told us that she doesn't have sex with people? I'm not a celibate. Just want to get that clear now, because honestly, that's the reaction I always get. I marry people. I bury people. I name people. I make up ceremonies for people who want other kinds of celebrations too. This is me at the office. This is what I wear to the office. This is me marrying a couple called Neil and Dahlia under a 500-year-old tree in a forest this summer. Now, Neil and Dahlia wanted to create a different kind of wedding ceremony. So what they did was we appropriated a Sikh ritual called a milni, and we got every member of each of their families to make a little commitment of love to each other. So the granny and the dad, all the way down through the generations, the teeny tiny little, really small nieces and nephews exchanged a ribbon. And then they tied those ribbons to a tree, which was planted in that forest as part of their wedding. This is another kind of day at the office for me. This is a group of families who have come together to learn how to play from their children, who are about to be in charge for the rest of the afternoon, taking the families into the forest, making up stories, building dens, destroying them, mucking about, reminding the parents how to play. For the last 10 years, I've been creating different kinds of experiences that connect people to their creativity, to each other, to their heart, and to the possibility of wonder. I've done that for tiny people, huge people, individuals, all sorts, but it's always experiences that are created. I learned how to do this professionally and in all sorts of other ways, but also from my mum. This is my mum, Maria, and her life and her death both combined to teach me not only how to celebrate, but how important ritual can be. Mum was basically the best celebrator of life that I have ever met. She had a unique gift of totally, thoroughly appreciating the moment. And it wasn't just the big stuff. It wasn't just the Christmases and the birthdays, although they were a big deal, as my sister will attest, the Easter Bunny, very important friend of the family. But it was also the tiny little things. So it was things like, I remember once when she cleaned the floor, she'd just read us Pippi Longstocking, she strapped scrubbing brushes to her feet and she skated around our kitchen. And then, to buff the floor, she got me to lie on a rug and yanked me the entire length of the house until the floor shone. She also gave me my first celebrant gig, actually. I took part in her wedding to my stepdad, Pete, took over from the priest, and led the congregation in song. They got it wrong. I was quite bossy. I stopped them. So I'm sorry. So let's start again. You've got it entirely. I'm a bit nicer to the crowds these days, but she did give me my first celebrant gig. She was brilliant at celebrating, and I wonder if that might have been, in part, because her childhood was spent as a refugee until the age of 6. Her parents fled the Russians invading Estonia. And for the first 6 years of her life, they lived in displaced persons camps in Germany. And this is a picture of her, poster child, raising money from the Swedish charities. Eventually, that's where they settled. And I don't know if that's why she was so good at celebrating, but I love this picture of her because this is what her greatest gift to me was, this ability to stop and notice and be present to the beauty in front of us. She died when I was 18. This is a photo of her when she was about that age. She was 18. And she was living in France at the time, and I was in my gap year between school and university. And I went down to visit her to spend my 18th birthday with her. And we were about to go out to dinner, and she fainted, and she fell, and she went into cardiac arrest. And I didn't know what to do, because I didn't know how to call an ambulance in a foreign country. So I ran outside and I flagged down a car and I stopped the driver and I asked him to please go and get help. And then there was this young family walking down the street, and I ran over to the woman and I asked her to help me, and went back inside and managed to get hold of my sister, who is in America, and my dad, who is in England. And then the paramedics were there, and then the doctor came, and there was an undertaker with him, and I was just so confused and traumatized. And I remember, as this whole chaos was going on, I remember my heart shutting down. I remember it very clearly. It was like ice covered it over. And I stopped feeling, and I stopped crying, and I stopped panicking. I just went numb. And then they told me that she was dead. And I stayed numb for probably the next few years. This is me on the day of her funeral. With her bear, Benks on, she bought herself a bear. She didn't have one when she was little. He was buried with her that day. And this is me in her hat, in a dress that she had bought for me. Very sad, but with a brave face on. 2 weeks after her funeral, when the whole gathering of friends and family had all gone away again, I was alone in the flat where we had lived and where she had died, and I was very low. But there was this market on a Saturday, and there was this one goat's cheese seller, this little old lady who would come in from the mountains only once a month with this particularly delicious goat's cheese. And I remember lying in bed that morning going, I don't want to get up ever, really. But there's the goat's cheese. So I got up and I put on my mother's black straw hat and I put on the dress that she had bought me for my birthday not long before, which I'd worn to her funeral. And I went to the market and I bought myself a huge bunch of white flowers. And I bought myself the goat's cheese. And I came home and I made myself a delicious lunch. And I thought, in this moment, for the first time, I'm embodying my mum. And I still buy myself flowers. And I still buy myself delicious goat's cheese. And I still go to farmers markets. And I still embrace her ability to celebrate the mundane. This is a ceremony which I created for those families who are playing in the forest. This was a reunion for them. This is where they all lit candles from each other's candles and took a moment to look into each other's eyes. You see, the thing about a ritual is it's a container around a moment. So imagine you take a frame in an art gallery with a painting inside it. You've seen paintings in art galleries, and you know you're supposed to give them your consideration. The frame tells you so. The contents are art, right? If you take that frame and put it into your imagination instead, and make it invisible, and make it amorphous, and make it fit around a particular time and a particular space, and then fill it with light and with color, and maybe with sounds, and maybe with tastes, with words, with thoughts, with intentions, and close it. Give it a beginning and an end. You've just created a ritual. You've made an artwork out of a moment.
For as long as I can remember, I've marked new beginnings in my life with a new container. Book bag, backpack, briefcase. And every new job I've had in my adult life has been represented by the new case that I carried all my stuff back and forth to work with every day. And it's always been important for some reason for me to identify new work with some kind of a new container for it. I can still remember the book bag that launched my elementary school days, and the backpack that companioned my law school days. And then when I became an articling student, I wasn't going to carry much stuff back and forth, and I had the smallest briefcase I've ever had in my life. And then when I began to practice law, my first job, this was the container. And then when I began to work here in 2003, this is the bag I've carried back and forth with me for the last 14 years. They're kind of my version of the finance minister's new shoes for budget day. Although my extravagance is a little more economical, especially since every one of these containers was gifted to me. This one was gifted to me by my parents in 2003. We don't only need containers to carry around our stuff, but we need containers to carry around our experiences. Maybe that's why we need rituals. Like Allison said earlier, we're meaning-making creatures who seek to symbolize and ceremonialize the events of our lives. And every tradition we know of, every culture has its ceremonies and its rituals. I stumbled into a local maritime tradition which was unknown to me until my father's death. When Don and I were greeting his friends at the funeral home during the visiting hours, my cousin's husband gave Don something to pin on my lapel. It was a white rose on a ribbon. It was the symbol that allowed visitors who were coming to the funeral home to identify who was the immediate family, to make sure that they spoke to the immediate family while they were there. And that symbol communicated to everybody who came through that door something that was common knowledge, like a poppy on our lapel communicates to all of us. We have all kinds of symbols and ceremonies to celebrate birth, to name a child, to mark a passage in our education. Graduations start with kindergarten or play school these days, right? There's coming of age rituals and admission ceremonies to professional societies and associations. There's initiation rites for fraternities and sororities. There's sod turning ceremonies to break ground for a new building, rituals to bless a new home, champagne bottles to break on the hull of a new ship, a glass to shatter as a way of celebrating a new marriage, ribbon to cut, balloons to release, ashes to scatter or bury, candles to light, bells to sound, sage to burn, drums to beat, songs to sing, words to speak. That need that we have to pause and honor a memory, an experience, a transition, a relationship, that need we have to infuse the events of our lives with meaning. We give expression to that in ceremonies, in symbols. Isn't that the need we hear expressed in that story we're given from the Jesus tradition that I shared with you a moment ago? A story that's told by 3 different first century storytellers. 3 of the 4 gospel writers relate this story of the inner circle of Jesus, friends and followers, wanting somehow to represent their experience of a moment in something tangible. Let's build a cairn. Let's stack stones one on another. Let's create something to mark this shining moment. And each of the storytellers placed that story at a turning point in their experience. In a time when they're moving from being between the community of learners who followed around this radical first century teacher to when they were becoming the community of leaders. And that light that they'd seen in their teacher, that light that they'd known in their prophets and in the leaders of the past, by the time these stories were written down, that light they had received from their tradition and experience, that light that they had seen in Jesus of Nazareth, was now theirs to shine. We understand that need to frame a moment, to build some kind of container for our joy, our memory, our sadness, our achievements, our transitions, our passages, our ahas. Ways to pause and bring intention into the events and experiences of our lives. With something sometimes as ordinary as a cup of coffee. The way a day can begin in ritual. Or with something as simple as a candle, the way a day can end in ritual. As we pause and name our gratitudes or speak our fears or bring to mind those who need strength for the day or the night. In the summer of 2016, I was part of a community of friends from among several in this room, a community of friends who carried the remains of another friend to a beloved mountain he had hiked many times in his life. We went there as he had asked us to do, to walk a trail he knew well, to see the beauty that had inspired him, to share a meal with each other, to enjoy a very particular red wine from his collection that he had recommended for this particular occasion, and to take what was left of his body to a place where he had felt most truly alive. It was a place he went to many times in his memory over the final weeks of his life. And each element of that experience we shared became a ritual because of the intentions we brought to each act. And those rituals turned a hike into a pilgrimage. On our descent, on day 4 of our 5-day experience, we stopped spontaneously with one another to speak of our friend at a particular bench and to offer something of his essence and something of his substance to that place. We'd been pausing here and there along the trail a number of times, but at this particular spot, we were joined by a butterfly that landed on the hand of one of our hikers. And it lingered there for minutes that felt like hours. And we began to sing. And we sang those words of Chris's that we all just sang a few moments ago. We began to sing, "Beauty is around me. Beauty is within us. Beauty is between us. Beauty is unfolding in us." And we sang and sang and sang ourselves into the pause of being present to the sacredness of life and death and to the mystery of being. It was one of those moments in life that was intensely lit. Just like that experience that we're given from the first century. It was like that experience from the world of the ancient story, where your heart just wants to linger for a very long time, and where you need to build something, some cairn, some container, some story, some song, some silence, some gesture, because you know this moment is so transparent. It's one of those times where you're seeing through time to its fragility and its sanctity. And it's a time you return to again and again and again in your memory for its wisdom and for its power. It doesn't take much to frame a moment, to create a sacrament, to bring an experience to ritual. It takes an intention to pause, to celebrate, to honor, to let something simple represent the complexity of our experience. It might be a piece of bread, or a candle, or a stone, or a cup, or a glass of wine. We name it, and we borrow it to name our experience. However spiritual or secular we think ourselves to be, however mystical or pragmatic we tend to be, none of us really can escape our need for ritual. So this is a moment for us to hold this silence with each other, to think about the rituals of our lives, the occasions that invite our celebration, that invite us to pause, to hold something, and to ask ourselves if there's something in our experience that's just waiting for us to bless it with our attention or our wonder, or maybe even our tears.